Hi, my name is Dr. Karmen Smith, and I'm a trauma specialist and an ordained minister. I have over 20 years experience working in the child welfare field, and I've dealt with a lot of parents and children that have experienced trauma. Today, I'd like to talk to you about turning triumph from trauma, or trauma to triumph. It's possible. And I've worked with people every day on how to turn trauma into triumph. And it's possible. One of the first steps that I'd like to share with you is probably the most important, or maybe I should say it is the most important. And I learned this from my mom, who was also a social worker. And she would come home with stories about all the clients that she was working with and all the drama and all the situations that she was dealing with at work. She worked with domestic violence patients. She would work with schizophrenics, a lot of mentally ill people that have experienced trauma in their life. And she would come and tell stories, and I really wasn't interested in them because at that time I wasn't interested in social work. But she would come home one time, and one story in particular I remember. I was probably about 14 years old. And she came home and she said, one of my clients was sent to the hospital last night because her boyfriend sent her to the hospital. He almost choked her to death and really beat her up badly, and she's in the hospital. And she said, and bless his heart. And so I stopped her and I said, well, don't you mean bless her heart? She's the one in the hospital. He's a jerk. And she said, no, bless his heart, because nobody grows up wanting to hurt the one that they love. Nobody grows up as a child saying, oh, I want to hit and strangle a person that I love the most in the world and send him to the hospital. She said, no, that's not how it works. He said, that's not who he is. That's not who he wants to be. And so he needs our blessing right now. He needs for us to see him the way he truly is, which is a loving individual that is doing some things that are very hurtful to himself and others. She said, if I saw him like a villain, then I wouldn't be able to help him. She said, I need to see him the way he truly is, a child of God who's doing the best that he can at this particular moment, and he needs to come up higher in the knowledge of who he is. My mom understood that unless she saw him the way he truly was, nothing was going to change. He was going to continue to see himself as this bad person and have a lot of shame around it, which would continue the cycle of trauma. And he would create that trauma in his own life and in the people that he loved the most. So my mom started her understanding with that client with a blessing. What a powerful lesson. And I didn't really get that at 14. It took me years to understand the depth of her truth and the depth of her knowledge and wisdom. But I think it's an awesome truth, and that's what made her a great social worker. She was a type of person that would see the flaws in another person, but also see the strengths. And she would work off of those strengths. She would give their strengths the most importance rather than giving their flaws or their bad behavior the center of her attention. She gave her attention to those aspects of their personality that she wanted to increase, that she wanted to see more of, that she knew was there and just needed more growth and more encouragement. What a powerful lesson. As a social worker, and I've been a licensed clinical social worker for many years, I see a lot of parents that are struggling with generational trauma, domestic violence, substance abuse, rape, molestation, neglect. All of those things come across my desk in the child welfare field. And as a therapist, I read many court reports that would just make the hair on the back of your neck stand up because it's just trauma and negativity. But when I see that parent, I can't see them as a villain. I can't see them as their behavior, because that's not truly who they are. Who they are are wonderful creations of God, created in God's image. They don't see themselves that way because they wouldn't be behaving that way if they did. And this is an awesome truth, that what we believe about ourselves will come out into our behavior. So if you believe that you're worthless, good for nothing, unloved, all of that is going to show up outside in the world as your behavior. And are you going to be the loving individuals that you are, or are you going to be destructive to the people around you and to yourself? Well, it's all based on what you believe about yourself. And this is something that I've learned in my profession that is part of my job as a change agent, as a catalyst for change, is that I have to see my client the way they truly are, not based on what they believe they are, what they've been told they are. And a lot of my parents that I work with have come from parents where they were told when they were growing up that they'll never amount to anything. A quick story. One time when I was first in this child welfare field, I was supposed to do a family assessment on a mom and her 16-year-old daughter. And there was lots of conflict in the family. The 16-year-old had been in and out of juvenile detention for theft, for drug selling, for stealing cars, things like that, and even sex trafficking. She had been caught up in a ring and been in and out of juvenile detention. And so finally they wanted a family assessment, and so they brought the mom in, a single parent, and she sat down and the child was right next to her, the teen was right next to her, and their body language was very telling because they were sitting very apart from each other, and you could tell there was this negative energy between the two of them. During the course of the conversation, the mom said, "You know, I never wanted her. She was a product of rape. And I told her since she was young enough to understand or young enough to walk that I should have aborted her." And hearing these horrible words, I turned to the 16-year-old to see if she was in shock, because I was in shock. My mouth was probably open. And the teen said, "Yeah, she's been telling me that ever since I can remember." And I thought to myself, what are birthdays like? What are Christmases like when your mother tells you that she wished you were never born? What is your life like? Well, after a while you begin to believe it, that you're not worth anything. Why are you here? And then I understood why this 16-year-old was in and out of detention, because she believed that was who she was, worthless. And so her life was following this track that made perfect sense based on how she was raised. And then I thought, well, this mother, what happened to her? And then as I started talking to the mother, she revealed how she was abused and neglected when she was younger. So she didn't know how to be a mother. She didn't know how to be an encourager. She didn't know how to do any of those things. So how could I villainize her or judge her badly for saying those horrible things to her daughter? She didn't know any better. She didn't have any better. And most of all, she didn't believe any better about herself than her daughter felt about herself. So you can see how trauma can be generational, that based on how we were raised, well, that's our model for parenting. That's our model for giving encouragement and love and everything that people need. And so if we don't have it when we're young, is there any way that we can get it? Well, we absolutely can. But we have to recognize and not judge others for not believing the best about themselves. We never really know the road another person has traveled. All we know is what they're presenting to the world. So if they're angry or arguing or doing criminal acts or messing up their body with drugs, we shouldn't necessarily judge them as bad people. They're not bad people. They're people that believe negative things about themselves, and it's presenting itself in the world as behaviors. So the best understanding and best truth that I got from that was my mom. She knew that you have to start with yourself as a therapist, and you have to see that other person the way they truly are, not based on their behaviors, not based on the report that's in front of you that talks about all the negative things that they've done, but see them as a child of God and see them as having wonderful strengths within them, but they've never had the encouragement, they've never had the belief about who they are really seep into their soul. And so that's the therapist's job, to see them as they truly are. And only when we can see them the way they truly are can change happen, because they can feel that energy from you. Oh, you're not shaming me. You're not judging me like everybody else does. And so it gives them a space to explore something different about themselves, to rise up to what your vision is of them, which is a true vision. Something will click within that person also that will seem really familiar, because we come into this world with abundance, with a wonderful knowledge of who we are, with love, with curiosity, with all of this wonderful potential. And so it's there already. It's sparked when somebody else recognizes it and sees it within you. There's also a very key component to all the concepts that I'm talking about, and that is what Gandhi talked about. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. What does that mean? Well, as a therapist, and in the context of what we're talking about right now, what it means is that I have to be that recognition. I have to be that positive energy in somebody else's life. I have to become it so that I can reflect it to that client so they can see who they truly are. What does that mean? I know it sounds kind of spiritual and woo-woo, but basically what it means is that everybody has a dark side. Everybody has negative things that they've done in their lives. Instead of covering it over or pretending that I don't have a dark side, I'm just this really spiritual person, I have to say to myself, okay, what are some of the things that I have believed about myself that have caused negative behavior? And when I can see that in myself and say, okay, I forgive myself for doing that. I didn't know any better. I was manipulative. I was critical of another person. I was judgmental. I've done some negative things before in my life. I need to forgive myself in order for me to recognize that I have some of those negative things in me also. So I'm not looking down at another person that comes across my desk. I'm recognizing that we're the same. You've done some negative things that you're ashamed of. I have too, but I've also gone the extra step and forgiven myself for them, recognizing that I don't have to live that way anymore, believing that I am one with the universe and more powerful than I thought I was, and I can change those behaviors. So in other words, I need to go through the same process that I'm asking my client to go through. If I haven't forgiven myself of some of the things that I've done in my life, if I don't recognize that, yeah, I've had negative behaviors that I'm not proud of, if I don't recognize that, then I see somebody that has negative behaviors, I'm going to judge them harshly because, oh, look at you. I'm suppressing what I've done. I can pretend I've never done anything. And as long as I'm looking at you, I don't have to look at me. And aren't you just the horrible person? And I feel like our society is going in that direction. And there are many things on television, like American Idol and all these talent shows, and they get their audience by criticizing others and really putting them down, like, oh, you're so horrible. And everybody laughs, and they get ratings for criticizing people. Well, that's not very healing. It's very shaming, and people like to watch that kind of stuff. I understand. But as far as healing other people and making a better planet and a better universe, we need to be the change that we want to see in the world. So if you want to see healing, if you want to see positive behaviors, if you want to reflect what the joy is within yourself, then you have to be it first and not expect it to come from other people and then judge them when it doesn't. So be the one is one of my favorite sayings. And why is that? Because this world needs to see the change. It needs to see us all being the abundance that we are, the love that we are. And that's how you heal trauma. It's not by seeing it as a separate thing. It's not by judging people. It's not even by criticizing the trauma. It is lifting people up from that powerless situation that the trauma created and letting them see how powerful they are, because the power is coming and emanating from you. And they'll be able to recognize that. One of the other things that I think is very important when working with people that have experienced trauma is your intention. Your intention is to heal and to be the change, be the healing, show what healing looks like, and empower that other individual to step into it. I remember when I first started working at the county and I was seeing clients, and I would go into their homes and do therapy for 12 weeks with a family in their home, which is very intensive, and you're right in the middle of everybody's life, right in the middle of the trauma going on. And I would say to my boss when we would have a staff meeting, I would say, I'm honored to be in the presence of somebody who is going through a traumatic situation or is going through problems. I'm honored by that. That is a blessing to me. And what I would get was my boss would look at me like I had 5 heads. I mean, they didn't really understand where I was coming from. But this is what I understood, is that trauma is an opportunity to go to your highest self, to get in touch with your soul, to have a spiritual awakening. Trauma has that capacity to do that, to bring you up higher. You can either go down lower, and it can either break you, or it can have you come up higher into who you truly are. So when you look at it, if I'm a therapist going into a trauma situation with a family, what am I getting into? I'm getting into a sacred space. That is a sacred calling, and I am grateful for it. And I need to be there in that traumatic experience, being a representative of their highest self, their spiritual self, and recognizing that they can go through it too. So this is Dr. Karmen Smith. I hope this has been very helpful to you in some way or another, because I know that you can be the one.